Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Justin Sears, and I run marketing at LucidWorks. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, Translating Insight into Action, Recommendations to Know, Win, and Retain Customers. The next 45 minutes will be informative and interactive because we have two speakers who know as much as anyone about how to make digital commerce more personal to your customers. Peter Curran is the General Manager for Digital Commerce at LucidWorks and an expert in e-commerce. For 25 years, he has worked on just about every e-commerce business model, category, and company size. He has advised both B2B and B2C e-commerce organizations across the full life cycle. Brendan Witcher is Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. Brendan serves digital business strategy professionals and is an expert on consumer behavior and technology trends in the commerce engagement space. I've gotten to know Brendan especially well through our collaboration on a thought leadership paper named Connected Experiences Are Personalized Experiences. Forrester Consulting surveyed 355 global decision makers who were responsible for data and search, and the findings of this original research confirmed the LucidWorks approach to digital transformation. We call this the Connected Experience Cloud, or CXC for short. You can download that research and learn more about CXC on the LucidWorks website. LucidWorks has many commerce customers in Europe, so we ensured that the research included a significant number of respondents from the UK and Germany. We are excited to share insights specifically about Europe as well as the broader global trends in the report. We've pre-recorded our conversation so that we could be available to answer your questions in real time via the attendee chat widget on your On24 viewing console. Feel free to ask questions directly to Brendan, Peter, or myself as we listen to the conversation together. So let's begin. Brendan, please introduce yourself and give us more background on the Forrester TLP study that you led.
Yeah, thanks very much. It is good to talk to you today. It is good to be a part of this discussion. I think it's very important for people in industry to understand some of the trends and some of the behavior, some of the things that are happening, but it's also important to note where others are having challenges and how they're able to address those things. Some of that's going to come out in the data we're going to show you today, and some of it's going to come out through the conversation we're going to have about what's going on in the industry, the conversations that I have, the conversations that Peter has with people in the industry. So let's get started taking a look at where the data is coming from when we do reference it in the presentation today. So this is the study that we did with LucidWorks, and you can see that these are sort of global respondents. You can see we had the US, we had the areas of the EU, we also had areas of APAC in there as well. And then you can see the titles and the industries we addressed, the departments they worked in, number of employees, things like that. All across the board, it was a very nice mix. And when we focus on EMEA specifically, you can see that the numbers don't change very much other than the fact that we've collapsed it down to just that one group in the EU. There isn't a whole lot of sway in the data. So nice, again, a very nice mix that you'll see here. You'll see also that 2/3 are multi-brand and 1/3 are brands. So we got some pretty complicated retailers in there as well. These are not just simple retailers selling one thing or having one channel. And you can see also that they move across different departments, from e-commerce to data to marketing, advertising, customer service, and even digital, if somebody has a title that lives just in that particular area. So as you can see, we've got lots to work from here. With that, I'm going to hand it over here, and let's talk about these findings and what we found, and talk about what's going on in the industry.
Thanks, Brendan. And we'll be highlighting 7 key findings from the thought leadership paper. And let's start with the first one. The first key finding was it's not enough to understand your customers. You need to take action. Brendan, what actions do brands need to take today to win and retain customers?
You know, the thing about consumers today is that they absolutely 100% expect brands to understand their needs, understand their preferences, and in fact, understand their pain points in order to deliver better experiences for them. So when consumers go to a website, they're going to be thinking to themselves, this is add value to my life. Is it relevant to me? Is this easier or simpler than everybody else that's out there? This is a core idea that a lot of people forget, is that consumers know they can get products anywhere. right? I mean, really, when you think about it, ask yourself this question. If I wanted to buy a coffee maker or a toaster, or let's just say even outside of retail, a savings account or insurance for your motorcycle, right? Like, it doesn't really matter what the product is, because you can get things everywhere. The question becomes, who's going to deliver the experiences that work for you? And the way that you get to those better experiences as a retailer or brand is you listen to the customer, you understand their needs. Unfortunately, we found that many organizations today don't use even the tools that they have in order to understand what is the customer asking about, what do they need. Let's take a look at this number here. Only 2 out of 5 of all respondents say they can use voice of the customer data from search, as an example, for strategic decision making. That's a real challenge, because this is the customer actually having a dialogue with you. They're saying something to you. They're telling you what they're interested in. They're telling you what they want. And yet we find that companies aren't using it. They may be using it at tactical levels, but if you're going to be an organization today, you have to raise the investments you make to the strategic level and use those tools to help guide your strategic decision making as an organization as well. Now, let's just see what this looks like in another area. EMEA brands report higher rates of using search to identify sentiment, tone, and intent for customers over North America, which is good news. That's great. But what's interesting about this is that when we look at the they're half as likely to translate those activities with search and browse into next best actions. So while they're taking it in and they're taking a look at it, they don't translate it into business activities. Now, this is really important. Why? Because at the end of the day, your P&L isn't going to say the number of times you looked at search data, right? At the end of the day, your P&L is going to be driven by how much cost you reduced, or how much revenue you drove, or how much net margin you gained. Like, that's what really matters at the end of the day. So if you can't take data from these voice of the customer positions and use them to actually change the outcomes for customers and improve business, then the activity in of itself is somewhat of a waste. And so it's really important for organizations to understand this. I'm sure that Peter's kind of seeing the same things in the market as we're seeing.
Yeah, I think the thing that's hard about this is that if you are sitting in a chair where you're listening to that voice of the customer data, the customers don't speak in a chorus. They speak in a cacophony of different voices. And so when you find some thing that you want to take action on, the trouble then you then run into is, do I curate a manual sort of next step for that voice, or am I able to act in a more dynamic way that addresses the multitude of voices coming at me? And so for my money, that's really the key, and probably why you see some of these low numbers is that companies have an ability to take some kind of a manual action. It's a more scalable, dynamic, personalized response that they want to be able to take.
I know we had this other finding as well. Brendan, maybe wrapping up this topic before we go on to the next one. Explain what this says.
I think it's important to note that when companies do take a look at data and they can go in and look at the activities and browse behavior and take actions on it. I think what's really important with this, in fact, just building off what Peter just kind of talked about here, I want to point out that culturally, organizations aren't often ready to think about data at the strategic level. When you've got somebody sitting there saying, well, what are you going to do about it, down to someone in the rank and file and saying, okay, what are you going to do to create better customer experiences? The question becomes more, what should the company do differently, right? Rather than taking tactical actions, I think we need to take strategic actions. And that's becomes a critical component of the strategy that organizations need to apply.
And that's a great segue, Brendan, to the next key finding. That last slide was talking about search and browse, but this key next finding is about a newer form of interaction. Invest in chat to interact in real time with customers and drive action. So how does chat and even other forms of interaction help brands create relevant experiences? Do you want to take that one, Brendan?
Yeah, so what we've got here is you can see is that the data shows that North America pretty much strongly agrees with the idea that not only chat, but things like customer center interactions and even stated preferences, those are underutilized in EMEA compared to North America. North America's numbers aren't great. Let me be super clear here, right? Those numbers are still pretty low. It's only about 1 out of 3. But in EMEA, it's only 1 out of 4, right? So that's significant. But I think what's really important is to understand that it's not just the chat channel, but that channel itself becomes very, very important. Now, here's the thing that I have found with the companies that we work with. One of the reasons that they have not or are not currently working with these channels to get data and get a better understanding of the customer is because for years, we simply didn't have the capabilities to do anything about it. Unstructured data like voice and chat and things like that, historically, were very, very difficult to work with. There's 2 elements that have become part of our current tech stacks that enable us to now use that data and combine it with structured data like transactions or name or gender or things like that to create those better experiences. And that is the components of AI and the ability to assess things. And then underneath that, which is probably the more important component, is natural language processing and natural language analytics. So when you're able to go in and scale, right, and be able to look at the voice of the customer and really understand what's being said and what's being used, then you can start to pair that with information you get from other places in the customer journey. And then you start to understand how you get a much better, in fact, picture of the customer and what their needs and their wants are. So to some degree, we can't be saying, retailers are behind. The reality is that they're not that behind. They're just not aware that there's so many things you can do now that we just simply couldn't do even just a few years ago that can be used to create, better customer experiences.
Yeah, I think as a technology provider of this, kind of technology, we definitely have a nice experience sitting in customer demos where people are blown away by what natural language processing and deep learning can do. I mean, it is getting to the point where interacting with a virtual assistant can be very much like interacting with, and it's sometimes more satisfying than interacting with a human being. The real challenge, though, is not just the technology. The question then becomes, I have this ability to understand the way humans speak or the way that humans write, but how do I then direct that consumer down a path that's going to be good for them and good for my business? Well, to do that, I need training data. And so now the retailer or the B2B company has to think about, well, what is the source of the training data that the NLP technology and the chat technology will use in order to make decisions about how to route a consumer. And so I think a lot of retailers and businesses who are interested in taking advantage of the technology need to think then, where am I going to get this information? And the great thing is that there is a kind of exhaust that has naturally come off of call center interactions and ticket-based interactions, FAQs that your product development people have created. These kinds of data sources become the training gas, if you will, that you put in the tank of the chat and NLP technology. So a lot of the art of doing what we do is going and finding those mines of important information, feeding it into the artificial intelligence and NLP technology the right way, and then you can deliver, a really, really great user experience.
Yeah, if I could pair onto that, if I could jump in on something there that I really liked what was said, is that what companies tend to forget are the two parts of that you just really talked about really well, which is the idea that it's not everything, right? Like companies say, well, whenever I talk about using voice of the customer, like, oh, but what about this scenario? It's like, okay, yes, you can cherry pick scenarios where these things, don't necessarily work. But for the vast majority of questions and customer interactions, you can remove a lot of that mundane conversation that doesn't necessarily need to happen with a human being. And in fact, for years, this has been known, is that when you remove some of that work out of your contact center, you actually create a healthier contact center. Because what ends up and by that I don't mean like sickness. I mean that they're happier because they're not spending their days answering those mundane questions. They're spending their days answering real customer questions, where they're letting the machines answer questions that are more basic or more about structured information or things about products and things like that. But then again, as you can see here, chat and virtual assistants and contact center interactions are not mutually exclusive, because organizations also, as Peter alluded to, have an escalation strategy and understand, like, at what point in a conversation does this need to move to from a virtual to a chat, and then from a chat to a contact center. So if you're thinking about it that way, I think that that's the right way to think about the value of voice, and not discount it right away, because you could come up with one or two scenarios where it's like, oh, well, that's not going to help customers who have problems with this. Like, no, you should go to a call center solution for that, right? But that's still a conversation that can be analyzed and understood for creating value for the organization. It doesn't really matter what the channel is. It's about having these tools in place so you capture the voice of the customer in the right way and in the appropriate way, and then be able to analyze it so that you have a better view of the customer, no matter what channel they end up using in that particular scenario.
Those are fantastic points. We're going to go on to key finding number 3, but I'll remind the audience, if anything that we are saying is striking a particular nerve, we're available to answer via chat. So send those questions in on chat. And Peter, let me stick with you on the 3rd key finding from the study. Personalization must occur real time, not after the visit takes place. Peter, tell us more about what this means. What's underneath this point?
Yeah, so personalization is really funny to me, because I've worked in technology now for 25 years, and I feel like I've been doing personalization for almost all of it. So personalization's not a new thing at all. And I think the thing that's really interesting is how scary personalization is. There is something that is at risk when you decide to personalize a user experience. The last thing you want to do is come across as stupid, like, hey, you're recommending me a product again that I already bought from you. Or creepy, like where the site or the app seems to know a little too much about me to make that kind of recommendation. Like, we need to break up our relationship just a little bit. Thank you very much, Mr. Retailer. I don't want you to know that about me. So, there are something at stake there, and yet it's undeniable, that as a consumer, I wear a lot of hats. Sometimes I am an over 45-year-old male who is shopping for clothes for myself. Sometimes I am an over 45-year-old male who's shopping for a 13-year-old girl's outfit because I have a daughter. So treating me in one way as if I always wear one hat, is a place where a lot of time personalization technology that tries to slot me into a really narrow kind of segment or user cohort kind of falls apart. So really, the technology, in my view, needs to be responsive to the current session. It needs to understand and draw inferences from what am I showing as a preference right now, and how can the technology meet my goal. Brendan, I wonder what the reports say about this finding.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Before I go into that, someday I'll share with you, Peter, some of the screenshots that I've had, simply because I bought yoga pants one day. I have some fairly inappropriate advertising being that way. I am not a soccer mom, nor am I the kind of person that would wear spandex to a gym. So I don't know why people still think that, even though I bought those things. So
we're going to keep.
But I want to touch on another thing that you said. Yeah, I want to touch on another thing you said earlier too, which is that I've been an analyst for 7 years, but I wasn't born an analyst, right? I actually had a life in retail before this. I was head of strategy for Guitar Center before that. I was in marketing at Harry and David, and so I've been talking about personalization for a really long time. But what I think has changed so much is the definition of personalization. So when we first started doing what we called personalization, when digital became a thing, we started doing personalization more online, and people started talking about it. What they really meant was we're making product recommendations. Now, the vendors who supplied product recommendations, that's not their fault, but they kind of monopolized that term. And so a large percentage of retailers and brands still think when I personalize experience, it means I show them a product that they might be interested in. That is no longer the definition of personalization. Personalization by the companies that I work with, they basically categorize it as being able to create relevant, value-added experiences for consumers. Now, there's a dramatic pause in between those two things because you have to be able to be relevant and you have to be able to add value. You have to be able to do both. Sometimes you can be relevant without adding value. Sometimes you can add value without being relevant. That doesn't work. You have to do both. But the thing of it is that companies today, when they do that, they really open the aperture quite a bit. And they can do that through many different ways of talking to consumers. It's not about necessarily offering me the next product I'm interested in. It's about creating the journey that adds value for me. So, for example, I like using comparison charts and product reviews when I shop, right? So yeah, that's true even if I'm going to buy a pen, right? So the reality is that what we need to do is we need to understand what makes us us. What are the conditions for this customer that they're telling us are important to them? Do I want buy online, pick up in store? Do I want same day delivery? Do I want to talk to a local store associate? Am I looking for coupons and offers, right? Like my wife is a good example. She's opposite of me. She doesn't look at comparison charts and product reviews ever, but she'll look for coupons and offers and discounts because she's a bargain shopper, right? I am an idiot. I fill my basket on Black Friday and then I check out a week later paying full price because it's just how I am, right? And so we have different values in the things that we need. And the understanding of that is what makes the ability to deliver those better experiences for consumers. Now, the second thing that I find is that companies have usually some sort of a personalization strategy, which is great, but they also have an omni-channel strategy. Many of them are saying, yes, the consumer has become more digitally savvy, which means we need to create better experiences for them. But at least the companies that I'm working with also acknowledge that there's another way to describe consumers today, and that they become channel agnostic. Right. And so they are shopping when they want, where they want, how they want. And many companies, unfortunately, take the position that personalization and omnichannel are two different initiatives. They really are not. Because as you create cross-channel experiences, these paths to purchase for consumers, you should also make them relevant and value-added, right? Like that's the key is if you're going to really take it to the next level, that's what you need to be able to do. And so what I find is that companies today often work on them separately when they should be working on them together. Take a look at this number. 33% say our company provides relevant and connected experiences across channels on the customer's path to purchase. Again, only 1 out of 3. So it's a very low number. And in fact, let's take a look at some EMEA data here. When we look at what they're able to do or what they're focusing on, you can see this is EMEA versus USA. Where's the biggest gap? It's in solving customer pain points. USA focuses far more on customer pain points than EMEA does. And you may say, well, what's the big deal? Shouldn't the other ones matter more? Customer intent, customer needs, customer preferences. Actually, that is a mistake that most organizations make, is they think we can we can surprise and delight our customers into happiness. The truth of the matter is we don't get surprised and delighted, right? We drive our cars, and the fact that our car got us where we wanted to go, we aren't surprised and delighted by that, right? We're like, of course we got where we need to go. That's exactly how I expect life to work, right? But if your car breaks down on where you need to go, do you have some choice words for your cars at the moment that you remember? Yes, right? We're far more affected by pain than we are by pleasure. So giving me a great experience is like, okay, that's nice. But when you send me 136 irrelevant emails a year that have no interest in me, that's a pain point. When I get up, get in my car, drive to your store, park in a parking lot, go in, look for something to buy, ultimately finally find it, 45 minutes later of my life, and you don't have the size that I want, and there's no way for me to order in the store, you've wasted my life. That is a pain point that we need to solve for. We need to understand what consumers' pain points are. Because I always say, Amazon didn't steal anybody's customers here in the US. You lost your customer. They were already looking, and that's how they found Amazon, right? It's because you were delivering too many pain points in the customer journey. So what I say to organizations are use voice of the customer, not to surprise and delight, but rather focus on areas of solving their pain points, because they will hyper abandon you and hyper adopt somebody else when the pain points become too great. And they'll say to themselves, I can get a coffee maker anywhere. I'm just going to find someone that can deliver the experience that I want.
And you just used the word hyper abandon, which might be a new term. I love that. So you're talking about the competition. And let's go into key finding number 4, Brennan. Understand who your competition truly is. Raise the bar. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So the reality is probably best said by a fellow named Jim Collins, who wrote a book called Good to Great. And if you ever read that book, or if you just want to crack open the very first page, the very first line of that book reads, "Good is the enemy of great." Good is the enemy of great. I love that line. And why is that probably the best line for businesses to understand? Is because when we do things good, we tend not to try to make them great, right? We tend to work on things that we do really badly. And then we end up in this position where we're basically just like everybody else. When you're good at something, it's like, all right, we're good at that. Fine, but so is everybody else, right? So what you end up doing is creating this sort of non-differentiation with yourself, where most customers today will say most experiences are, I describe them as meh, they're all right, nothing great, but they're not fantastic. And there's rare that we find the standout in organizations to be able to do that. Because your competition isn't necessarily, if you're in sporting goods, your competition isn't the other sporting goods companies. I know you think that it is. The truth of the matter is your competition is every digital experience that a customer has with everybody else. Here's an example of what I mean by that. Let's say that let's take it out of retail for a sec. Let's say you're a bank and you offer, let's say you go to your bank and you have a problem with your account, and there's a little virtual agent that pops up and says, "Can I help you with your account?" And you say, "Yes," blah, blah, blah. Virtual agent comes back and says, "Your account is fixed." Great. You go, "Oh, this is perfect. Fine." But then let's say you need to go to a different website. Let's pick an industry here. Let's say you go to an insurance website, right? Let's just pretend. Or even a grocer. Let's just say a grocer. You go to a grocer and you have a problem with your account, right? Like there's some misbalance, your gift cards aren't right or whatever it is. Now you're looking for that virtual agent, right, at that point, because you just had this experience with a bank, right? They're like, "Where is it? My account has a problem," right? And you see this little link that says, "Give us a call if you have a problem." And you know what that means, right? Like, this is my life. I'm going to waste more time doing this, right? Are you instantly disappointed? Yes. Did you compare that grocer, insurance company, whatever, to another grocer or insurance company? No, you compare them to the bank, right? You compare them to your last experience. That's the way consumers think. We tend to think like we're an industry and we think everybody just compares us to each other. That's not how consumers think. And so your real competition isn't necessarily what your competitors are doing. In fact, that's a mistake. What your real competition is, what are the experiences that customers are getting everywhere that's going to drive their expectations for me as a brand so that I can keep them. I need to meet them so I can keep them from going to other organizations looking for better experiences. Take a look at these numbers here. We believe our personalization capabilities are on par with those in our industry. Now, you can see that, in the US, we actually feel that we're mostly behind. That's probably due to our insecurities, which is fine. But the reality is that EMEA is a little bit overconfident here, right? Like they're saying, okay, well, we're above, we're leading, or we're ahead of, or we're in a greater degree, we're on par with. And this is good. This is 1/3 of companies are suffering from the good to great syndrome, right? They're not able to move to great simply because they say, that's good enough. We're going to work on this because we're really bad at it. And I'm not saying you shouldn't work on the things you're bad at, but what you got to be careful of is other organizations aren't checking the box yet on what they're good at. They're still improving it in order to create those better experiences for consumers. And that's what it really comes down to.
When you talk about this, Brendan, what it makes me think most about is the work that we have done with companies that are traditionally B2B manufacturers and distributors, but who are interested in kind of going in a direct-to-consumer B2C kind of route. And I'm buying a new window for my house and wanted to go directly to a window manufacturer to buy that window, and went to the website, and they had a way for me to interact with them. But it became painfully obvious that I was in the wrong place because, the questions that the forms and the sales associate who ultimately called me were asking me were technical. They used words, like mullion and sash and this and that, things that I don't know what those words mean, and immediately felt stupid and realized I should have gone to the Home Depot or gone to Lowe's. So, I think it's really important if you're going to kind of lean in this direction as a manufacturer going direct to consumer, you have to realize that the consumer has, maybe an interest in what you have to offer, the extra depth that you can offer them as the manufacturer, but they may not possess the same level of language and fluency as, say, a professional might if you're accustomed to dealing with those professionals. So, being able to adapt just a little bit in order to handle that consumer interaction is a place that where my mind goes when I look at this finding. The other thing I wanted to say, Brendan, almost a little bit back on your last item, is one really useful thing to keep in mind when you think about personalization for me, and this is particularly important as we move out of an era where third-party data is starting to kind of vanish and is very much threatened, and now first-party data is extra important, is that there are aspects of me as a consumer or even as a business, this can apply in a B2B standpoint, that are aspects that are durable versus aspects that are transitory. So Peter, as a high-income earner over 45 years old, hopefully is a durable, certainly the over 45 part is a durable part of my personality, and my persona, and you can, in certain kinds of marketing activities, treat me that way. But there are other things that are maybe less durable. Peter interested in buying a backpack is something that is transitory, right? I might only need to buy that one time. And then once I've purchased that backpack or that toilet seat, thank you very much. You don't need to keep talking to me about that. So, I think that one of the mysteries of personalization and trying to unlock it is coming up with rubrics where you can sort of focus your personalization strategy. And for me, that's been one, thinking about transitory versus durable. That's been really effective.
That's great, Peter. Let me stay with you for key finding number 5, Peter, and that was treat commerce search as a transformative rather than transactional project. And Peter, it seems like businesses are using the words digital transformation for everything. Every other sentence includes digital transformation. Why is commerce search so often overlooked as a must-have for digital transformation initiatives?
Yeah. So I've spent 15 years working on this problem, so I could talk about it for weeks. So I'll try to consolidate this down to a few key points. One of them is that the data in the catalog is universally crummy. Everybody thinks that they, and in fact does, have really crummy data. Secondly, the technology until now has been really sensitive to that data quality. The way to get good search historically has been partly a few tips and tricks and esoteric, strategies that professional search tuning companies knew how to execute. But largely, it's about putting the data together, putting all the data together, and putting it into the index in the right way. So I think the first and foremost is that we kind of start the battle of e-commerce search with one arm tied behind our back. But the thing is that it is absolutely worth it. The conversion rate for a consumer who is using the search channel is always, I've only seen it one time across many hundred companies where the search conversion rate was at the same level or lower than the overall browse conversion rate. In all other examples, I've seen at least a 2x multiple, and in a few cases, like luxury, as much as a 10x multiple on searchers versus browsers. So, if you can make the e-commerce search experience really effective, particularly in the long tail where intent to purchase is extremely high, then you have the ability to really dramatically change the commercial outcomes on your site. So I think it's hard, but absolutely worth it. And like we talked about, before, there have been a lot of technological advances in this area. where we can look at a search not in terms of the words that the person entered, but in terms of their goal. What is the pain point, to use Brendan's language earlier, what is the pain point that this customer really has when they are entering this search query? What are they really trying to get done? I'll give you just really quickly before I turn it to you, Brendan, to talk about the finding is, one query I like to think a little bit about is organic lemonade. And if you think about somebody searching for organic lemonade, they have a goal, right? Maybe they're having a party and they have some adults coming and they're buying beer for them, and they have some kids coming and so they're buying lemonade for them. Now, that person's query for organic lemonade may be very important in terms of the organic aspect. I don't want to serve my guests something that's not organic. But if it's lemonade, it's mango juice, it's grape juice, I don't really care, right? So, this is the kind of stuff that we're figuring out how to do now in e-commerce search. And so I think the increases in commercial outcomes that we've seen with traditional tuning methods are only the beginning. There's a lot more that we can do.
Yeah. Yeah, Peter, I want to dovetail off something you just said there, which is, and it's probably because I'm an analyst, so it's my job to look for the challenges and things, right? But I love what you said about how you see search, and this is that's something we see too, right? Obviously, people who search are more engaged and more likely to buy. 2x, 5x, 10x multiples in some cases don't surprise me. I'm going to take it, I'm going to flip it around and say, but what if you don't get search right? That's what's at risk. Is your best customers. That's what at risk is your high quality traffic, right? Because we all have traffic, right? Coming to our websites, but there's low quality traffic and there's high quality traffic. And when you get search wrong, you're not really impacting the low quality traffic. You're impacting the higher quality traffic to a stronger degree. So that's why that's so important to get right. And I love the fact that we're leading with this idea of thinking about it as transformational or transformative rather, because of the fact that many companies today say, yeah, we're working on digital transformation and customer obsession and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, right? The reality is that, that's great to say, but if you don't have what that means or how you're using your tools today to be able to do that, then you have a problem. Let's look at the data, and then I want to make some points about it. You can see that 58% of organizations say how much benefit, if any, has your current customer search solution actually had on the following business goals that you can say with confidence you're able to measure. 58%, right? Only 31% out of EMEA, right? And when it comes to the digital transformation category. So let me ask you this. If you're not using voice of the customer to transform your business, what the heck are you using? Right? To me, that is the most important point. Isn't the point of our business to transform, to meet the needs of our consumers better? Right? I can't think of too many other areas where that becomes more applicable. But you're not transforming for the sake of transforming so that you can make the headlines on the Wall Street Journal or to impress your shareholders with some language you can say on an earnings call. Your goal is to create revenue. And the only way you're going to create revenue is if these transformational steps you take are aligned with improving things for the consumer so that they give you more business, so they give you better loyalty, right? And so to me, this is a huge miss that organizations simply just don't understand how your search solution is not tactical. It is strategic, and it needs to be elevated to a strategic level in order for you to be able to do these kinds of things and be able to create better experiences. Because the reality of it is this, and most people don't think about it this way, but again, I'm an analyst, so this is the way I think about it. You only have so many technologies you can use to transform your business, right? It's not like you have hundreds of thousands of technologies. You have search, you have e-commerce, you have an OMS maybe, you have a CRM, right? When you add it all up, there aren't that many technologies that you have, so you better use them all, And you're not going to win with one thing, right? Your CRM isn't going to get you 100% lift, and your OMS isn't going to get you 100% lift. It's going to get you 4% lift here, 5% lift here, right? That's how markets are won. They're not won all in one big shot. They're won on the margin by doing little things that collectively add up to a big increase and benefit to your company and ultimately to your customers. Search is one of those things that you got to take it out of the tactical area and move it up. Because even as we look at this, take a look at this. This to me is a shocking number, shockingly low number on both sides of the pond, right? When we say how much of a benefit, same question, if any, has your current customer search solution actually had on the following business goals that you would say with confidence you're able to measure? Grow revenue, if you're not there to grow revenue, I don't know why you have a search solution, right? Like this is the point, right? That's the point of it. You don't have a line in your P&L about how happy your customers are, right? And so I know I sound like a very big capitalist here and that I'm being insensitive to all things, but at the end of the day, your jobs, your abilities to get a paycheck and all that, and even mine and everybody else's, is the fact that we're having income. And that income is growing so that we can grow as a company and be more competitive and not get disrupted out of the industry. And so to me, this is something that I think organizations need to look at and say, did we buy the vendor we currently have? Really considering, will they grow revenue, or are they going to be able to understand if we're growing revenue with them, or are they able to help us transform into the company we want to be? These are not light questions, and they're not banal platitudes the way that other people say them. I'm saying them with real meat and saying the capital T truth about all this is that you need to be able to use these tools to create competitive advantages because you simply do not have that many opportunities.
And Brendan, let's stay with that for key finding number 6, apply, don't simply capture customer insights. So you were talking about transformation, revenue growth. How can businesses be better at applying customer insights? And I don't know, Brendan, if you want to start with this, or Peter.
Yeah, I'd like to start off with it if you don't mind, because I do think that I do have some commentary here before I show the data, because the reality is that, there's plenty of data. You have plenty of data, and you probably could say, well, we need more data. That's not true. What you really need are the right pieces of data, because the right pieces of data are the only kind of data that can be elevated and turned into actionable insights. More data doesn't do that for you, right? It's the surgical application. I'd rather have the right 5 data points than 500 pieces of data points that tell me interesting things, but I can't take action on it, right? And so what I find organizations do not have is they do not have a proactive data strategy. They do not understand the purpose of collecting data, the reason they're going to be able to do things, and the actions they could take. They don't build a roadmap for being able to get from data to insights to analytics, and analytics to act. And so what organizations need to do is be able to use their vendors and evaluate their vendors and use their search solutions to do that. Now, this is a big problem because in today's world, I find that most organizations, when selecting a solution provider, they'll take solution provider A, solution provider B, and they'll send them a list of 100 requirements, feature and functionality requirements. This company does 60 of them, and this company does 64 of them, and so you go with the company that did 64. The problem is that maybe these are the right 60, and half of these from this company are irrelevant. They don't have the other 30 that you actually need that this company has. So in reality, you should be selecting this vendor, but they don't, right? So did you evaluate? Can you say that you actually asked and evaluated your search solution provider on the consumer insights they're able to deliver? The ability to provide customer insights is greater at EMEA than it is in North America for sure, but it's still only half. And then on top of that, take a look at this one. This one is scarier than all of the rest, right? Which is tying these search results to actual business outcomes. Only a third of companies said we evaluated the vendor we selected based on that. That is the main point. It's not to own technology. It's not to have search. It's to create business outcomes. And so you probably need to look back and say, are we working with the right companies? Do we have the right organizations helping us transform, grow revenue, create better customer experiences, and ultimately tying these things to the business outcomes we're trying to achieve as an organization?
Yeah, I think kind of a flip side of this for us gets at something, Brendan, that you and our CEO, Will, spoke about around what we call the connected experience cloud. The idea that applying, an insight doesn't just mean personalization, for example, in a session. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. We have a customer, since we aggregate signal data, the exhaust from the consumer transaction, we can create reports off of it. And so we know that people who come and express a certain, one of our customers, when their customers come and express an interest in a certain color name and a certain category of product, they then go to a product details page where they end up selecting a different color. So what can we do with that kind of insight? Well, the last thing we should be doing with it is just leaving it in the hands of the site merchants and the people who are optimizing search and categories. We need to deliver that insight back to the people who are buying and designing the clothes that we sell, right? Give them some idea of what the actual end consumer experience is. And I think there are a variety of different applications of that, not just what colors should I make or what are the, what is the path to the popular products that I have. But, a lot of times, for example, in retail, you'll have one or two or three maybe products that make up the bulk of your revenue in a given season, and then everything else is pretty average. And then you have at the bottom some cohort of products that are kind of dogs, quote unquote, right? Ones that aren't selling at all. And so we fall into this trap of we sell the heck out of the really popular items, we muddle along with the big middle, and then we get very promotional about the stuff at the bottom. What if we can look at the customer interaction data and find out that those products at the bottom just weren't getting seen by people, right? They were never at the place on the listing page in the search result where people saw them. So how can we penalize that product and consider it a dog if we never put it in front of someone? And so I like the idea of being able to identify within all of the 5,000 or 500,000 products that we sell, what is our actual eyeball coverage on those products, and how can I get products that have some hope of selling if we actually gave them a chance, in front of consumers before I have to fall back into discounting. So I really think this apply, don't simply capture customer insights, and the idea of buying software, which you've woven into it here, Brendan, are really important, because now the software that you can buy is not just about fixing the search problem on your website. It's also about delivering insights back deeper into the organization so that you can make better products and show the right products to the consumer.
Peter, let's go to key recommendation number 7. And I love how you brought up the Connected Experience Cloud tieback, because we've seen from our customers during COVID, their ability to stay connected with customers digitally when they were in many cases less able or unable to connect in person with those customers. I think this is a great way to wrap up today's conversation. So COVID and post-COVID means dramatic traffic changes, opportunity, and risk. Capitalize on this with semantic approaches to search. Talk about that, Peter.
Yeah, so if you are like me and you've been sitting in a desk for the most part at home for the better part of the year and watching webinars and listening to insights, everybody's been talking for a year, of course, about COVID and what does COVID mean and what is the impact of COVID. And I certainly don't want to suggest that we're out of the woods. I know there are a lot of people in the world who are, definitely suffering still from the pandemic, and I hope that the shadow of it doesn't go much farther into the future. But I do also think now, though, particularly in North America, and I think soon in Europe and other parts of the world, we're going to see a kind of change in the nature of traffic on e-commerce websites. If you look at growth over the pandemic, it was very, very strong in Latin America. Here's some charts from eMarketer that are widely cited and relatively recent. Really strong growth in Latin America and North America, in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Middle East, everywhere saw many years worth of growth in e-commerce over a very short period of time. And if you look at the right graph, you will see that while we still see growth in e-commerce, the rate of growth is going to regress back to the mean. So we're not going to see COVID level of growth again in the post-COVID 2021 timeframe. That makes sense, right? People are going to have other places where they can go to they can go to a store and buy something that they need. But I don't think that's the only thing. I think another thing that's going on is that we have more places. Brendan said earlier, there are a million places where you can buy things. More places where consumers can buy stuff before they come to a website. So Google Shopping, for example, gives you free listings now. This was a thing that they announced in the last year. And what that means is that when I go to Burberry, for example, and I search for floral sneakers, I'm going to see a relatively narrow assortment of products that they have. But these free listings on Google Shopping are going to include products from Harrods and a bunch of other places where a consumer in the UK may be interested in shopping. And all of a sudden, I see this extra diversity without ever going on site. So that is going to take a toll on traffic as well. And what that means is that when you get the consumer onto the website, you absolutely have to convert them. And you have to give them the sense that you have the product that they're looking for, not necessarily focused on the words that they use to find a product, but instead focus, like we were talking about with organic lemonade, on the goal that the consumer has. So just to give you an idea of what that might look like, look at this search on the Costco UK website. Okay, so here I am a good English consumer in Costco in the UK, and I have searched for my favorite kind of chocolate, which is Cadbury milk chocolate, which you see everywhere in England. Whoops.
Peter, I'm sorry, I might be on the wrong slide, or there was a build there.
Yeah, we're good right there. I'll advance
okay.
it, Justin.
Okay.
Yeah, so here the Cadbury chocolate comes back when I search for Cadbury chocolate. But consider the possibility that the consumer is going to use language that isn't a good match for the language you use in your catalog. Like I was talking about earlier, this idea of poor catalog data is a universal problem. But consumers are just going to ask for things that you don't have sometime. So look at this example on the Costco US site where they do not sell Cadbury milk chocolate. But I've searched for Cadbury chocolate, and you can see that they've understood the query and that the consumer's goal is to buy chocolate, and they're coming back with premium chocolates from Godiva. Now, somebody from the UK listening might dispute the idea that Godiva chocolate and Cadbury milk chocolate are even comparable, but you have to recognize that in this case, what this Costco US website is doing is trying to understand the actual intent of the consumer, keeping them on site where they have an opportunity to convert them. So this kind of capability, I think, is critically important if we see dips in traffic, as we are seeing in some of our customers in the post-COVID landscape.
And Brendan, to wrap up, let me ask you, what are you seeing in terms of trends as the pandemic changes phases and people start going back into in-person? How much do you think of these changes are going to last, and what should we be looking for?
Well, I think the most important point is to remember that we are creatures of habit, and we will tend to go back to doing things the way that we used to do them because of the way we are. The consumer isn't changed forever. There's no such thing as the consumer that simply just buys online everything that they want, right? E-commerce has been growing for years, but even though we've had e-commerce for about 20 years, at least in the US, it was only 16% of total retail in the US, just as an example. Did it jump? Of course it jumped. I mean, we were closing stores. Consumers didn't have any choice but to buy online. But as we pull back from that, and now we get more opportunities to go back to store, will it be higher than 16%? Of course it will. It'll probably be in the low 20s, but it won't be in the 40 or 50% range that some people claim. You know, that's just simply not realistic, because we'll shop when we want, where we want, how we want, depending on the situation we're in. That's how consumers buy. There's nobody out there saying, I am dedicated to just being an online shopper. That person doesn't exist, right? Yeah. Stores aren't going away. I think we're going to find that, but we are going to find that consumers who have become more digitally savvy, if that was even possible before the pandemic, are going to expect these experiences to be better for them. So I would just say, you know, make sure you're keeping an eye on what consumers' expectations are now that organizations are offering more services and offering more high quality touch points, and make sure you're looking outside your own competitive set. I think those are the important points to keep in mind.
Well, Peter, Brendan, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I knew a little bit about this beforehand, but I've learned a lot just talking with you over the last few minutes. Thank you both for generously sharing your time and experience. Attendees, thank you for the excellent questions that you sent in through chat. If you want to learn more about the insights that Forrester discovered with this research, please download the Thought Leadership paper. Connected experiences are personalized experiences, and the subtitle is Connect Customers and Employees by Understanding Search Intent. And with that, I will close today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.